Well, my name is Alexander von Kaldenberg. I've been with DACSEE for the last year. And DACSEE stands for, I guess we should talk about the name first.
Yeah.
It's a decentralized alternative cab that's serving and empowering everybody. And that's a mouthful, and it kind of sounds kind of really lofty and like, what are you actually trying to do? I think Koreans or people living in Seoul are actually really, really blessed. Mm-hmm. You guys have an amazing taxi business, high standards. I mean, I was in Japan a few months ago. It was similar. White gloves, opening the door. But all you need to do is hop on a plane and go a few hours, basically any direction, and you find that the experience is quite different. So,
it's not like that around the world.
Pardon me?
It's not like that around the world.
It's not like that around the world. So, the reason for that service, though, is sometimes counterintuitive. We kind of think that maybe the drivers are dishonest, or they don't care, or they just have no interest in giving good service. But based on my own experience, traveling and whatnot, and now working for DACSEE, I've realized that actually their whole business is rigged almost against them. Okay. And what I mean by that is if you look at technology has just kind of left the average taxi driver behind and through apps. And that's where the ride-hailing giants have kind of taken off, right? Sure. Technology, number one. The sharing economy. People are more inclined to share. If you ask somebody, as I mentioned before, so you ask somebody to share their car with you 15 years ago, they'd look at you and say, oh, why would I share my car and help you get somewhere? That's kind of odd. Same as your house. You want to crash on my couch? Excuse me? That's odd. But the sharing economy today is actually very real. It's an economic phenomenon that's here, and it's increasingly accepted. Sure. And the third one is passenger preferences. It's what we want, right, and what we're willing to accept. So these disruptions have disrupted the taxi business. And so now when you get off the plane somewhere, the taxi driver has no incentive to give you good service because they're not going to see you again, generally speaking. Even in Seoul here, the guy had to give me his business card in order for me to somehow connect. So I said, okay, sure, come on Saturday when I'm leaving again. Oh. But that conversation happened via business card and a conversation. Right. Why? Shouldn't that be an application? Shouldn't that be automated? But the answer for why that's the case, or why it's not, is because businesses want to stay in between, right? We have to go outside of the business to facilitate that relationship. Sure. And DACSEE is a community platform that's designed by the community for the community, which means that we want to put the relationships back into the business. And we believe that if you help that taxi driver or that Lyft driver or that Uber driver to give them opportunities to get more business, that they will do better service because it's in their best interest to do so. Okay. Right? So that's the kind of the overview as to why we wanted to work with taxi drivers, work with governments, work with Lyft drivers, work with this entire business to try and improve it. The biggest reasons is that it's decentralized, right? The D in DACSEE. Okay. Everything that happens in the DACSEE platform happens in a decentralized manner. Okay. From me verifying a driver, to me referring a driver, to a driver in the network monitoring a trip, all of these things happen automatically via the platform. But the platform itself isn't hiring people to do these jobs. The network finds people within the network to do those and then compensates them accordingly. So you don't have to have extra incentives. You don't have to have extra investment into a platform to do these things. We can create an efficient ecosystem that maintains itself. Okay. And you make sure that the drivers at the end of the day benefit that. So they're not just having to drive all day in order to get their salary. They can also do other things in order to accrue more income. To be honest, right now, I'd say that the traditional companies right now in the space are not government friendly. Okay. And that's not me saying that, that's very commonly common knowledge. So every time we enter a market, the very first conversation we have is with the government, right? Yeah. So in Malaysia right now, we're able to go to market. In Thailand, we're able to go to market. In China, we want to go to market. And we're working with the governments in all these countries to make sure that we abide by the regulations. Decentralization, what does that mean? I mean, ultimately, decentralization means that you're not putting all the power in the hands of one person or one company or one body. And actually, there's a lot of safety in that. So from a government point of view, what we're doing allows a marginalized community in the taxi company to become empowered. So they're actually very much for that, and especially a lot of these Southeast Asian companies, they actually are quite positive in respect to that. Also, I think, to your point, though, not to dodge that, I think when it comes to cryptocurrency, a lot of countries are still figuring it out, right? They're still trying to understand and grapple with some of these questions. But I think the positive aspect of DACSEE is that it is open, it is transparent, and the fact that a government might want to audit or understand for tax reasons how much is being generated in a certain industry. DACSEE is the perfect example of how a government can look at our model, look at our business, and say, okay, this is what's being generated, this is the tax revenue that we're owed, and this is how we get it. Well, what other, why not blockchain? If you're putting, not to oversimplify it,
Sure.
but if we had to have staff that were monitoring all aspects of our business, that would be expensive,
Sure.
right? Especially as we grow and we scale. And again, the idea is that you can make all of this automatic. Right? You can make every transaction, every referral bonus, every tax payment, every point automatic. And the best way to do that is using the current technology, right? So DACSEE's already had a pilot for the last year.
Sure.
Operating in Malaysia. It was just based on limousine rentals to and from the airport,
Sure.
right? And that was just the very basic kind of application. There was no cryptocurrency, or there was no token, there was no points, nothing involved in that. So it's been actually operating under a different name, a different operation thus far. But we just had an event in Malaysia last week where we had 1,000 drivers that were primarily Grab and Uber drivers that came, and that has swelled to about 17,000 drivers. So number one, that shows me that there's Shira said, why not Uber, why not Grab, Didi? It's because these drivers are not happy. They're not happy with the status quo. So they're looking for an alternative. So we already have launched in Thailand. We've already launched in Malaysia. But now the process is how do we bring it from where it is now, which you have the drivers,
Sure.
and now flip it and try and make sure you have the customer base as well.
Okay.
So this is all going to be happening in the next few months. I'd say before June, you can expect to see, kind of the beta, the next step for DACSEE development. And for us, the big market that we're targeting after Chinese New Year is China, right? That's a huge market that we really want to move to, because I think the same principles there apply as do everywhere else. In terms of an institutional partner, like if you look at Ripple partnering with certain banks or whatnot,
Sure.
our model is a little bit different. We don't have any partnerships with ride-hailing companies. We do have consultings, like in China, we're consulting. Our consulting partner is Hejun, so it's actually a very, very well-known and respected consulting company in China that's helping us get to market.
Okay.
In Malaysia and in Jakarta, not so much. There's no. I can't think of an institutional partner. Maybe my team can.
It can be government. It can be.
In Malaysia, for example, maybe the best example would be the transportation agency. We had a local meeting last night where we had, with DACSEE, every decision is made by the community. So setting the fares, deciding on what the tax rate, deciding on how old the cars should be. This is a consultation between the drivers, the government, and local stakeholders.
Okay.
So this is not Alex or anybody on my team coming and saying, this is how it's going to be. It needs to be localized according to market. So last night we had a meeting, and we had the transportation agency there, and the drivers, for example, were saying, okay, we want to have the cars no more than 10 years old. Transportation agency saying, no, it has to be 7. So it's an example of how it's a collaborative approach to setting policies within the local market. And I think, to be honest, from what we're exploring relationships with universities or business centers or local kind of municipalities to set up, taxi stand approaches and whatnot. But at this point, I wouldn't want to articulate or say anything until those are actually finalized.
Okay.
I think that's a very market specific challenge. I think the example you can look at is you have Thailand and you have Malaysia and you have China, right? Those are the three markets right now that I can speak most about because I don't want to speculate about anything else.
Sure.
But those three markets, in Thailand you have more taxis than you do cars. People don't generally I mean, by and large, if you're on the streets, you see more taxis than you do anything else. So people take those before they take Uber, Lyft, Grab.
Sure.
Why is that? Because people, they don't have the same acceptance or openness to technology. They don't adopt it as quickly as they would in Malaysia. And Malaysia is completely opposite. Taxis are a no-go, as it was put to me when I was in Malaysia last week after my own terrible experience. Taxis are a no-go. So right there you have complete polar opposites, right? So when we're approaching drivers though, as individuals, it's about trying to connect to them on that kind of personal level in terms of the business that they're running and how DACSEE can help them. But if there's a reluctance to adopt technology, like you find traditionally in the taxi business, that's really hard to overcome.
Okay.
But it just takes a little bit more time, right? So that's one. In China, of course, the regulations are huge, and being authority friendly, it's easy to say, but you have to make sure that you check all the boxes and you cooperate and you have really strong local partners, right?
Sure.
Partners, whether that's institution, like you said, or government. So for us, it's really, really important that we continue to what's the word I'm looking for? That we continue to develop those regulations, or not regulations, that we continue to, that we're open to adapting and kind of adopting the policies that are set, because in China, that's the only way we'll ever get to market is by working closely with the government.
Yeah.
But again, that's a big difference. Another big difference between us and other companies is that those businesses sometimes have a enter first, ask questions later kind of approach,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of bulldoze in, and that's not what we're about, because that would eliminate one of the three pillars of our business model, which is to work with the governments. To be honest, I think we've been very successful. I know that it's been very volatile, but I don't think our fundraising effort has really felt the sting. I think not to sound overconfident, but we've been very successful so far in the first two stages of our ICO. So I don't think at this point that we are in a situation where we're having to kind of come up with backup plans or workarounds, if you will. To get us going, to get DACSEE started, that came from private investment, right? And those are individuals that are not concerned with kind of a short-term return on their investment, because they believe in the long-term success of DACSEE. But the platform itself, if you look at the development team, if you look at the people that were instrumental in getting DACSEE from, let's say, the beginning of the ICO onwards, those people have a stake in DACSEE. So you have so many tokens in the beginning, and a certain percentage of those have been set aside for the development team.
Okay.
That means that if DACSEE is successful, of course, they'll benefit. But what I think makes DACSEE again special is that there's no added benefit to a developer or a taxi driver or an investor or speculator, right? Everybody benefits from the same premise, the same basis, and that is, if the platform is successful, the token will appreciate, right? And so in that sense, myself as CEO or developer or a taxi driver, it's exact same. We have every interest in making sure that the government, the taxi driver, the passenger have the best experience and that have their needs addressed. Because if they don't, then the platform's gonna fall apart and there's nothing, no benefit for anybody. But I think, as I was explaining to somebody who came up and asked a question after, I said this 20% that we set aside, it's an arbitrary number. It can be more, it can be less in certain markets. But that 20% is almost like, not to trivialize it, but play money. We want to enter a market. We can work with taxi companies, we can work with governments, we can work with a university, we can work with whoever we need to in order to use that 20% to kind of work all the levers to make sure that everybody in that community benefits. The drivers get their commission, the government gets their taxes, maybe the taxi company that help refer all the drivers gets a percentage of the local fee, so they're not being cut out, right? So that's a really different philosophy than I think a lot of traditional businesses, which are profit maximizing, trying to squeeze every last penny out of selling hamburgers or driving cars or whatever it might be. So that's how we're able to maintain this, is because I think the stakeholders have a vested interest in making sure that the platform is successful. I think DACSEE sees itself as not taking over market. I think there's always going to be a reason to take a taxi, and we're happy about that. I think there's always going to be a reason why you might want to take Uber or Lyft or Grab. I think DACSEE is trying to do something just a little bit different, and trying to, one of the aspects I did talk about was kind of the social aspect of it, and our co-founder came up with the kind of the Facebook of ride sharing. Right now, you don't have the opportunity to go to the airport efficiently, in the sense that you have a taxi, you have a ride-hailing platform where you can just phone a friend, right, to get there. But imagine if you could do that all in one application, right? On that application, you have just like your Facebook friends, and you say, hey, I'm going to the airport on Friday, anybody want to take me?
Sure.
Right? That to me is something that's so simple, you should be able to do that right now, right? If you look at having a preferred driver, Uber originally was your private driver.
Sure.
But even if you had a private driver, how could you ever save them again without going outside the application to do that?
Sure.
DACSEE allows you to do that within the application. And then of course is being able to call any random driver. So I think DACSEE has a niche, but what's fundamental to that niche is the relationships. I think that we want to give more power to drivers, and more choices to passengers, and work with governments. And so in that respect, I think we have a real opportunity to carve out our own niche in this ride sharing business. Two things. Number one, the length is because we are raising a lot of money.
Okay.
But if you look at the scope of what we're trying to do in terms of going to market and implementing in all of these different countries, that's not an easy process. It's not a quick process, and it's not necessarily a cheap process. Difference is that our investment is going towards implementation versus technology. That was another question that was asked there. It said, how can you possibly, have you thought about how you have to scale this? Like, that technology is crazy, it's be expensive. And I said, well, it's true, but actually the application is finished.
Okay.
The money that we are raising now is going to getting to market. Right? We already have drivers ready to go. Right? We're going to market. So from an investor's point of view, they're able to see our plans actually being carried out. So that's one part in terms of the amount of money that we've raised and that we're going to raise is because we have one chance at an ICO, right? So we need to make sure that we have enough to implement our vision across Southeast Asia, Asia. Beyond that, at this point, we don't look, but that's the first priority, right? So that's, I think, why it's a little bit longer than most. But actually, it's actually shortened in the sense that we've done the pre-ICO and the ICO simultaneously because we don't want to extend it even longer than it is. So for those donors or those investors that make smaller contributions, we consider that part of the ICO. But for those ones that make larger contributions, we put that under the pre-ICO, where they have a bonus for investment.
Huh?
So by putting them simultaneously, we're able to actually, even though it might not seem like that, shorten the whole process. As an investor, I think the most exciting news is always when they get to see your investment in action.
Sure.
And again, I don't want to overemphasize that, but that's something that's very special. You yourself probably know countless projects, countless ICOs that have a really cool vision, really cool technology, but you're talking about years away. So I think the simplest and coolest and kind of news that you'll be able to see from DACSEE is you'll be able to see drivers driving with DACSEE in their window. And ultimately that is the goal, is to get to market. And so we will be going to market in the next few months in a few different markets, and that's all ultimately the vision. And then from there we scale. So I think stay tuned to that, and yeah, I think that's probably the coolest. And register, and the process I think takes 15 minutes. It's Bitcoin or Ethereum, and it's quite straightforward.